Anxiety doesn't usually arrive as panic. It starts as noise, a restless mind that won't slow down, thoughts stacking on top of each other, the feeling that your body is tense even when nothing is happening. Most people try to calm this with distraction, reassurance, or force, but the mind keeps running. In this video, you'll learn 5 distinct stages behind what Tibetan monks describe as an internal switch, a trained response that can shut down anxiety in about 4 minutes, even when the mind feels out of control. The third stage is the switch itself, the exact combination of body position, breathing, and gaze monks use. But it only works if you understand the first 2 stages. Skip them, and nothing changes. And the fourth stage explains why this switch works even if you're skeptical, stressed, or don't believe in rituals at all. This isn't meditation. It's not positive thinking. And it's not about calming thoughts one by one. It's about activating a built-in system that your nervous system already understands, but most people never learn how to access. By the end of this video, you'll know why your mind won't stop, how monks interpret anxiety differently, how to activate the monk switch step by step, what's happening inside your nervous system when you do, and how to use this method in the moments you need it most. And stay until the end, because using this switch at the wrong time won't help. But using it at the right moment can change how your body responds to anxiety almost immediately. Let's start with the moment your brain refuses to slow down, and why trying to calm it usually makes things worse. For most people, anxiety doesn't feel dramatic. It doesn't announce itself as fear. It shows up as restlessness, the inability to sit still, the sense that your mind is always one step ahead of the moment you're in. You lie down to rest, and thoughts get louder. You try to focus, and your attention fragments. Even during quiet moments, the body feels tense, as if it's preparing for something that never arrives. Modern life trains this state relentlessly. Notifications interrupt your attention. News cycles keep the nervous system alert. Unfinished tasks linger in the background of the mind. Over time, this constant stimulation teaches the brain that vigilance is normal. The problem is that the brain never receives a clear signal to stand down. People often describe anxiety as overthinking, but that's only part of it. What's really happening is that the nervous system stays activated long after the original trigger has passed. The body remains in a low-level state of readiness. Breathing becomes shallow. Muscles tighten slightly. The jaw clenches without awareness. Thoughts speed up not because the mind is broken, but because the body hasn't been told it's safe. This is why telling yourself to relax rarely works. The mind takes cues from the body, not the other way around. When the body stays tense, the mind stays alert. And when the mind stays alert, it scans for problems to justify that alertness. The result is a feedback loop that feels impossible to escape. Many people search for techniques to turn off anxiety, but they're looking in the wrong place. They try to silence thoughts, control emotions, or reason their way out of the sensation. Yet anxiety doesn't begin in thought. It begins in physiology. The thoughts are a symptom, not the cause. Tibetan monks describe this state as a mind without an anchor. Attention floats from one concern to another, never settling. They don't interpret this as weakness or lack of discipline. They see it as a nervous system that has lost its reference point. Without that reference, the mind keeps moving, searching for stability. This is where the idea of an internal switch becomes relevant. Monks do not try to slow the mind directly. They look for the point where the system can be reset. They ask a different question, not how do I stop these thoughts, but what signal is the body missing? Most people assume the body needs rest or reassurance. Monks observe something else. The body needs orientation. It needs a clear signal that the present moment is stable. Without that signal, anxiety persists regardless of logic or intention. This explains why anxiety often spikes during moments that should feel calm. Sitting alone, waiting, lying in bed. The absence of external demands removes distraction, and the nervous system fills the gap with internal noise. The mind doesn't slow down, it accelerates. Monks recognize this pattern early in training. Long hours of silence expose the restless mind quickly. Instead of fighting it, they study it. They notice how anxiety rises with certain postures, breathing patterns, and visual habits. Over time, they identify a consistent truth. When the body is oriented correctly, the mind follows. This is why monks don't search for calm by thinking. They search for it by adjusting the body's signals. They treat anxiety as a state that can be shifted, not a problem that must be solved. But to do that, they first redefine what anxiety actually is. They stop calling it fear or weakness. They see it as energy without direction, movement without containment. That perspective changes everything. Because once anxiety is no longer an enemy, it becomes workable, trainable, something that can be guided rather than suppressed. And this is where the monks' view of anxiety diverges completely from the modern one. They don't ask how to eliminate it. They ask how to organize it. To understand how they do that, you need to understand how monks interpret anxiety at its core, not as a flaw but as a form of internal wind that can be redirected. In Tibetan monastic training, anxiety is never described as a mental disorder or a personal failure. It is described as movement, specifically movement without structure. Monks use the term often translated as internal wind to explain this state, a restless force moving through the body when attention has no anchor. This idea changes the entire relationship with anxiety. Wind is not dangerous by itself. It only becomes destructive when it has no direction. When wind is contained, it turns wheels, moves boats, dries fields. When it is scattered, it creates chaos. Monks see anxiety the same way. It is energy that has lost its channel. This is why fighting anxiety rarely works. Resistance adds more force to an already agitated system. The more you try to push it down, the more pressure builds. Monks are trained to notice this immediately. If the mind feels fast, they don't slow it. If the body feels tense, they don't force it to relax. They redirect the movement instead. One of the first lessons novices learn is that anxiety is not created by thoughts. Thoughts appear because the body is unsettled. The nervous system sends signals upward, and the mind tries to make sense of them. This is why anxious thoughts often feel repetitive or irrational. They are not conclusions, they are echoes. Monks learn to watch how anxiety expresses itself physically. Where does it gather? For some, it rises into the chest. For others, it tightens the throat or pulls the gaze upward. The body always shows the pattern before the mind explains it, and that pattern is consistent. Anxiety pulls energy up and out, away from the center. This upward pull is what makes anxiety feel ungrounded. Breathing becomes shallow. Vision narrows. The body prepares for action without knowing what action to take. Monks describe this as wind escaping its container. The goal is not to stop the wind, but to bring it back into form. Importantly, monks do not label anxiety as negative. They see it as raw fuel. The same internal wind that creates restlessness can also create clarity and alertness when guided properly. This is why monks can sit for long hours without dullness. They don't suppress energy, they organize it. Modern approaches often focus on calming anxiety. Monks focus on stabilizing it. Calm is a side effect, not the target. When energy is stable, the mind naturally quiets. When energy is scattered, the mind stays noisy regardless of intention. This is also why monks don't use the same response for every situation. Anxiety before danger is useful. Anxiety before performance can sharpen focus. The problem arises when anxiety appears without purpose. That's when it becomes exhausting. Monastic training is built around teaching the body when to shift states. Anxiety is not removed, it is switched, redirected from chaotic motion into contained presence. And that shift happens at the level of the body, not thought. This is the key difference between monastic practice and modern stress management. Monks don't ask you to analyze your anxiety. They ask you to locate it, to feel how it moves, to notice how it pulls the body out of alignment. Once that is clear, intervention becomes simple. Because anxiety does not need to be solved, it needs to be grounded. This is where the idea of the monk switch becomes precise. The switch is not a concept or belief. It is a physical reorientation that brings scattered energy back into the body's center. When that happens, the internal wind settles, the mind follows. But this switch is not activated by breathing alone, or posture alone, or focus alone. It requires three elements working together, each correcting a specific aspect of the anxious state. That combination is what monks use to flip the switch. And once you understand it, the process becomes surprisingly direct. When monks talk about the switch, they are not referring to a mental command. There is no instruction to calm down, no attempt to reason with the mind. The switch is physical. It is a coordinated change in posture, breathing, and visual focus that tells the nervous system clearly and unmistakably that it can exit alert mode. Monks discovered long ago that anxiety pulls the body in three predictable directions. The spine collapses or stiffens. The breath rises into the chest and speeds up. The eyes drift upward or outward, scanning for threats. As long as these three patterns remain, anxiety cannot fully settle. The switch works by reversing all three at once. The first element is the body. The posture monks use is neither relaxed nor rigid. They sit or stand with the spine upright, as if gently lifted from the crown of the head. The chest is open but soft. The shoulders drop naturally. The weight of the body sinks downward, especially through the feet or the sitting bones. This downward orientation is critical. Anxiety lifts energy upward, the posture brings it back down. The body alone already begins to change the nervous system. A vertical spine improves vagal tone. Grounded weight distribution signals stability. The body stops preparing to flee. But posture by itself is not enough. The internal wind can still move too fast. That is where the second element comes in. Breath. Monks do not take deep breaths to activate the switch. Deep breathing can sometimes increase anxiety by overstimulating the system. Instead, they slow the breath and lower it. Inhale gently through the nose, allowing the abdomen to expand before the chest. The inhale is calm and unforced, lasting about 4 seconds. Then comes a brief pause, not a hold, just a moment of stillness. The exhale is where the shift accelerates. It is slow and longer than the inhale, flowing downward as if the breath is sinking into the lower body. 6 to 8 seconds is common. This extended exhale tells the nervous system that action is no longer required. Heart rate begins to slow. Muscle tone decreases. The internal wind loses speed. But even posture and breath together are not enough. Anxiety often persists because the visual system remains alert. The eyes keep signaling that something needs attention. Monks address this directly with the third element, gaze. Instead of closing the eyes or staring outward, monks soften their gaze and lower it slightly. The eyes rest on a neutral point a few feet ahead, without focusing sharply. This downward, unfixed gaze reduces sensory input and tells the brain that scanning is unnecessary. The world is stable. Nothing is approaching. When body, breath, and gaze align, the switch flips. Not metaphorically, but physiologically. The sympathetic response fades. The parasympathetic system takes over. The internal wind that felt chaotic moments ago begins to settle into a steady flow. Monks practice this combination for exactly 4 minutes. Not because 4 is mystical, but because it is long enough for the nervous system to complete the transition. The first minute calms the breath. The second stabilizes posture. By the third, the gaze softens and attention drops inward. By the fourth, most people experience a noticeable shift, less pressure in the chest, fewer racing thoughts, a sense of being present again. There are common mistakes monks warn against: forcing the breath, holding tension in the jaw, trying to feel calm instead of letting calm arrive. The switch does not respond to effort. It responds to alignment. When effort appears, anxiety often follows. With practice, this routine becomes automatic. Monks can activate it standing, walking, or even mid-conversation. The body remembers the pattern. Anxiety no longer escalates because the system knows how to reorganize itself quickly. What surprises many people is how little belief is required. You don't have to trust the method. You don't have to feel spiritual. The nervous system responds to signals, not stories. Change the signals, and the response changes. And this is where modern understanding catches up with ancient practice. Because neuroscience now shows that posture, breath, and gaze directly influence stress circuits in the brain. The switch monks discovered is not symbolic. It is biological. Understanding why it works makes it easier to use consistently. And that explanation begins with how this combination rewires the nervous system's response to stress. What monks discovered through observation, modern neuroscience is now beginning to explain. Anxiety is not just a feeling. It is a state created by the nervous system. And that state can be shifted when the right signals are sent at the right time. Your nervous system operates largely on automatic patterns. When it detects uncertainty or threat, it activates the sympathetic response. Heart rate increases, breathing speeds up, muscles tense, vision sharpens. This response evolved to protect you. The problem is that in modern life, this system is triggered constantly, often without real danger. The monk switch works because it directly interrupts this pattern at 3 critical entry points: posture, breath, and vision. Each one sends a message to the brain. Together, they create a signal strong enough to override anxiety. Posture is the first signal. An upright, grounded spine activates sensory receptors that inform the brain about balance and orientation. When the body is stable and vertical, the brain receives feedback that the environment is manageable. Slouched or rigid postures do the opposite. They signal collapse or readiness to fight. The monk posture avoids both extremes, creating a state of calm readiness instead. Breathing is the second signal, and it may be the most powerful. Slow nasal breathing with extended exhales stimulates the vagus nerve, which plays a major role in regulating stress and emotional responses. When the exhale is longer than the inhale, the body shifts out of fight or flight mode. Blood pressure drops. Heart rate variability improves. The body moves toward regulation instead of defense. The pause between inhale and exhale also matters. That brief stillness breaks the rhythm of anxious breathing. It gives the nervous system a moment to recalibrate. Over time, this teaches the body that stillness is safe, a lesson many anxious systems have forgotten. The third signal is vision. The eyes are directly connected to brain regions responsible for threat detection. When the gaze is wide, unfixed, and lowered, the brain interprets the environment as stable. There is nothing approaching, nothing requiring immediate action. This is why softening the gaze can quiet the mind faster than thought-based techniques. When these three signals align, the parasympathetic nervous system becomes dominant. This doesn't mean you become sleepy or passive. It means the body returns to a baseline state where focus and clarity are possible. Anxiety loses its fuel. What makes this approach especially effective is that it does not rely on belief or interpretation. The nervous system responds to physical cues whether you understand them or not. This is why monks can train children with these methods long before they understand the philosophy behind them. Repeated daily practice strengthens this response. Over time, the nervous system learns that anxiety does not require escalation. The switch becomes easier to activate. The threshold for stress rises. Situations that once triggered anxiety begin to feel manageable. Importantly, this does not eliminate anxiety completely, nor should it. Anxiety is useful when danger is real. The goal is not to remove it, but to regain control over when it activates. Monks train flexibility, not numbness. This understanding also explains why the switch works best when used early. Once anxiety has fully activated the stress response, it takes longer to regulate. Early intervention keeps the system from locking into a defensive loop. But knowing why the switch works is only part of the equation. The real value comes from knowing when to use it and how to integrate it into the moments when anxiety feels unavoidable. Because the switch is not meant for quiet rooms and perfect conditions. It is meant for real life. Monks do not wait for perfect conditions to regulate their state. They train specifically for moments of pressure. The purpose of the switch is not comfort, it is control. And control matters most when anxiety threatens to take over. The switch is most effective when used at the first signs of escalation. A tightening in the chest, a quickening of breath, a sense of urgency without a clear reason. These are the moments monks respond to immediately. Waiting until anxiety peaks makes regulation harder, not impossible, but slower. Before a difficult conversation, monks activate the switch quietly. They align their posture, slow the breath, soften the gaze. This takes less than a minute once trained. The result is not emotional numbness, but clarity. The body stops reacting, and the mind becomes available again. In situations like exams, public speaking, or decision-making under pressure, the switch can be used preventively. 4 minutes beforehand is often enough to stabilize the nervous system. This changes how information is processed. Instead of reacting, you respond. Instead of rushing, you act deliberately. During panic or intense anxiety, monks emphasize gentleness. The switch is not forced. Even partial alignment helps. Slowing the exhale alone can begin the shift. Lowering the gaze reduces sensory overload. Small adjustments add up. To build reliability, monks follow a simple training structure. For 30 days, they practice the switch once or twice daily, even when calm. This conditions the nervous system to recognize the pattern. Over time, the response becomes automatic. The body remembers what to do before the mind starts to spiral. It's also important to avoid turning the switch into a performance. There is no success or failure. Some days the effect is immediate. Other days it is subtle. Both are normal. The goal is consistency, not perfection. Monks also understand the limits of the practice. If anxiety is accompanied by severe symptoms, chest pain, fainting, confusion, it requires medical evaluation. Regulation is not a substitute for care. It is a way to support the system, not override it. Over time, people who train this method often notice a shift in identity. Anxiety no longer defines their experience. It becomes a state they can influence. The sense of helplessness fades. Confidence grows, not because the world is controlled, but because the internal response is. This is why monks describe the switch as a form of freedom. Not freedom from stress, but freedom from being ruled by it. The external world remains unpredictable. The internal response becomes reliable. You cannot control every situation you face. You cannot eliminate uncertainty, but you can train the system that responds to it. And once you know where the switch is, you're never truly without options.